Welcome to Investigations in Ritual Abuse Training Class 1. I am your host, Cole, and today is our first class. Today's class is entitled Always Start with a Victim. The credible allegation always begins with a victim. Our agenda slide here shows you the structure of today's class, which covers credible allegations from a victim, primary source documents, first and second-hand witnesses, the perpetrator, the patterns, how to think analytically about allegations and evidence, and our goals as investigative researchers. At the end of today's lesson, there will be a homework assignment, and as always, we have space for Q&A. The credible allegation always begins with a victim. The victim is a first-hand witness, source, and reporter. An allegation from any other source is just gossip. If the victim doesn't want to talk to us, or if we don't have their story from police reports and victim statements, we have nothing to proceed with. Starting with the victim's story enables us to have a first-hand source, and to test the credibility of that source. The statistical rule that I've developed is based directly on the academic studies of childhood sexual abuse. If the victim is under 6 years of age, 50% of the time their abuser will be a family member. If the victim is between 12 and 17 years of age, that percentage drops to 23%. 93% of child sexual abuse perpetrators are known by their victims. In order to measure the credibility of a victim's story, we're going to draw from credible sources such as academic studies, to compare the victim's story to what is known about childhood sexual abuse. If the story aligns with the known patterns and facts about childhood sexual abuse, it's more likely that it's credible. If it does not, we have to ask hard questions. I want to stress this point. Our job is not to believe victims. It is to distinguish between true and false accusations based on the facts and the evidence, and to prove true allegations while discarding false accusations. Organized groups who perpetrate child sexual abuse will send false accusers to investigators and attorneys in order to destroy your credibility. If you don't test the accuser's story, your own credibility will be compromised. Your ability to help victims will be destroyed. Myth number 1 in our line of work is that perpetrators of child sexual abuse look like pedophiles. They don't. They look ordinary. They're doctors, lawyers, accountants, therapists, manual laborers, and they look perfectly normal. If it were easy to identify a pedophile or a child abuser by looking at them, the average pedophile wouldn't have between 150 and 185 victims over their lifetimes. These are socially intelligent individuals. They understand how to ingratiate themselves to other people, how to blend in, and they demonstrate an extraordinary understanding of the social rules that govern the groups they belong to, such as churches and clubs and businesses. That's how they evade detection and exposure for years. They are good at what they do, and you underestimate them at your own peril and the peril of victims. They look like you and me. We don't assume anything as researchers. We test everything, including the credibility of the victim. We don't think in terms of myths about victims or perpetrators. We think analytically, and we use facts and evidence to do so. Our own biases are irrelevant. How we feel is irrelevant. If the facts add up to a credible allegation, we move on that allegation. If the facts do not add up, or if we catch the accuser in a lie, we move on, and we do so quickly. Always tell a victim to tell you the truth, even the parts that make them look bad, because if you can find the lie, so can any competent defense attorney. I cannot stress this enough. A credible allegation is an allegation made by a victim to law enforcement. That's all it ever will be. It is not an allegation made by a parent, grandparent, relative, or a friend. A credible allegation has no half-truths, omissions, or outright lies. It has no financial considerations, such as a demand for money. Any allegation outside of these parameters is a waste of your time and energy. It's a diversion from credible allegations involving actual victims who need our help. We've got 3 sources in the cycle of our investigation. The first is the credible allegation made by a victim to law enforcement. The second are primary source documents provided by victims to police, and by police to you, via the victim's request or a Freedom of Information Act request at the state level, and each state has a different name for that request. These documents can be police reports, medical records, affidavits, court records, and so on and so forth. The third source is a corroborating witness, someone who either witnessed the abuse firsthand, or who has been abused by the same perpetrator, or someone who the victim spoke to about the abuse, who can corroborate the details of the allegation to show consistency over time. These 3 areas are what you will draw from in your investigative research to prove or disprove an allegation. You'll be pulling criminal and civil complaints from court cases, medical records that your victim signed a release for, and genealogical records for the victim and the perpetrator that can show you the family history of those involved. If in the course of your research you catch the accuser in a lie, move on. Their credibility is gone at that point. Any defense attorney will shred them later on, and your credibility is at stake. Remember, in the end, our goal is to bring what we find to law enforcement, and if we have a reputation of bringing deceptive accusers forth as victims, law enforcement will not listen to anything we have to say. If a victim's story is true, the evidence will not disprove it. If the evidence disproves it, then the victim is lying. Move on. We want to be very careful with the allegations we make against individuals, because these are the worst allegations you can make. Additionally, if you falsely accuse someone of a crime, they can and will sue you for defamation. In some states, there are criminal defamation statutes on the books. Always err on the side of caution when it comes to accusing people of a sex crime. Start with credible allegations, based in evidence. A credible allegation that did not generate a conviction will have certain components that explain why a conviction was not obtained. First, sex crimes are expensive to prove. They're revenue-negative cases. Second, no victim is ever perfect. A victim of sexual abuse will often have mental health diagnosis, substance abuse issues, a criminal history, difficulty obtaining or maintaining employment, bad credit, and a history of erratic or inappropriate behavior. We're not looking for perfect victims because those are impossible to find. We're looking for credible allegations. Again, cost is the biggest factor. These cases cost a lot of money for an uncertain result. If a perpetrator was arrested, that is credibility in and of itself, because prosecutors won't proceed unless they find the allegation credible due to the cost and difficulty of proving the case. A prior history of familial sexual abuse or criminal history on the part of the accused establishes credibility. In the Hamblin case, we know that Kate Baxter, aka Kate Hamblin, walked into a Provo police station in 2012 and accused her father David Lee Hamblin and her mother Rozelle Stevenson of sexually abusing her and her sisters over a 2-decade period. David Lee Hamblin had a prior history of sexual impropriety. He lost his license to practice as a psychologist for having sex with his patients and trying to convince them that the sex was part of their therapy. He was recorded apologizing to his daughter for raping her before his arrest. His ex-wife Rozelle was also recorded during a conversation with her daughter, and Rozelle did not issue a flat denial of the abuse allegation. Instead, she said she didn't remember the alleged abuse and that her ex-husband had been programming at the time. Of the 4 Hamblin daughters, Miriam Hamblin was conspicuously absent in the 2012 to 2014 case. She did not fill out a victim's statement or file a report against her parents. She did discuss the abuse with her boyfriend and others. Timothy Nathan Tuttle, the husband of David Hamblin's sister Kristen Tuttle, was convicted of molesting his adopted daughter. This is a pattern of behavior that we will often see in the families of those accused of sexually abusing children. Tuttle and his wife were allegedly members of Hamblin's ritual abuse ring. Another family member who was convicted of sexually abusing a child is Sterling Van Wagenen, who was David Lee Hamblin's cousin-in-law and his patient. Van Wagenen is notable for founding the Sundance Film Festival with Robert Redford, who was married to Van Wagenen's cousin Lola. That's 2 family members for David Lee Hamblin, who were convicted of sex crimes against children. When considered with Hamblin's taped apology to his own daughter for raping her, the credibility of Katie Baxter's allegations continues to increase. In addition, Hamblin's patient and alleged ritual abuse ring co-member Gordon Bowen also had abuse allegations against him by stepchildren, his biological children, and multiple male co-workers and associates. Bowen went to work for Robert Redford at Sundance as well, but he was fired for a litany of inappropriate acts, which culminated in an argument with Redford and one of Redford's other employees. Again, these facts tend to elevate the credibility of the allegations against Hamblin by showing the presence of sexual abuse allegations within his family and friends network. Pedophiles and child abusers, like any other group of individuals with common interests, tend to cluster together socially. Kate Baxter alleged that her family was part of a multi-generational ritual abuse group operating with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This group ritually abused their own children in order to turn them into adults who would perpetuate the group into the future. The group committed any number of crimes including sex trafficking, murder, drug trafficking, rape, child sexual abuse, the production and distribution of child pornography, the operation of a child prostitution business, and other illicit activities designed to further the interests of the group. The Church of Satan was comprised of families from specific royal bloodlines. These families believed that by inverting LDS temple ordinances, they were glorifying Lucifer and helping to restore him to his rightful place as the heir to Heavenly Father's throne. The group purported to have gatekeepers within the legal, political, educational, and medical establishments of Utah and the United States, who could intercept any attempt to expose the group or its members. These gatekeepers could effectively cover up the activity of the LDS Church of Satan by leveraging their position within government agencies and private institutions. Many of these gatekeepers were also members of the elite families of the LDS Church of Satan. What do we know is true about the Hamblin allegations? We know that David Lee Hamblin apologized to his daughter for raping her on a taped phone call. Therefore, it is reasonable to say that we know that David Lee Hamblin raped that daughter. We know that David Lee Hamblin admitted to having sex with his mentally ill patients and trying to convince them that the sexual contact was part of their therapy. Therefore, it is reasonable to say that David Lee Hamblin targets mentally ill men and women for the purposes of sexual exploitation and his own sexual gratification. We know that the court in his divorce found by clear and convincing evidence that he molested at least 2 of his daughters. Therefore, it is reasonable to say that David Lee Hamblin sexually abuses children and the mentally ill. Female perpetrators of child sexual abuse are extremely rare. Studies indicate that between 7% and 20% of perpetrators of child sexual abuse are female. Females work peripherally with a dominant male perpetrator in childhood sexual abuse, according to the academic literature. The Hamblin allegations fit within this paradigm. David Lee Hamblin was the dominant figure, the paterfamilias of his family, endowed with the wisdom of parents to know what was best for his wife and his children. The Hamblin sisters describe a dynamic where their father directed their abuse, and their mother was subordinate to their father and grandfather, Roselle Stevenson's father Richard Lloyd Anderson. Statistically, the Hamblin allegations make sense. What's the point of all of this? Why do we do the work of investigative research? What's the end game? To build cases as close as we can to completion in order to turn over what we find to law enforcement, prosecutors, and civil attorneys who will hold perpetrators accountable. Sound methodology in research helps us to do that by starting with a credible allegation, using credible primary sources, and building a provable case. The more we can do for law enforcement and prosecutors, the cheaper and more efficient it is for them to prove a case. It makes it more likely that they will move forward for victims if the work is already largely finished or completed when the evidence is handed off. The reason we do what we do is to make it more likely that law enforcement will do something to hold perpetrators accountable. It makes it more likely that a civil attorney will take the victim's case and sue the perpetrator, because they don't have to put as much money into proving the allegations due to the fact that the work has already been done. That's why we do this. It's why we stick with the structure of a credible allegation and sound methodology. Go to Utah Course Change. You can Google it. Choose Set up an account. Once you've registered, add credits to your account. It takes $5 increments, so add $5 to your account. Once you've added credits, log back into Change. Under case type, select state felony, or FS. In the last name field, type in Hamblin. In the first name field, type in David. You will see 5 cases pull up. Choose Sanpete case, Manti District. Download the information indictment dated 10/17/2022 and the ruling dated 4/18/2024. There will be an open book quiz on these 2 documents at the beginning of Class 2. As always, thanks for showing up and taking the training. We'll see you next week.